Well, good morning. I'm Chris Clark, President of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. I want to welcome you to our Resiliency and Recovery Roundtable. We hold these each week. Next week, we'll actually hold two with manufacturers around the state of Georgia. So I hope that you'll join us. We'll give you those details when we finish today. But today, we are focused on Georgia's largest industry, our agribusiness sector. And we've got three great folks joining us today who are great members of the Chamber, as well as active in their own communities around the state of Georgia. And before we get started, I do want to thank our friends at Deloitte for helping us with our Recovery and Resiliency Task Force, as well as our friends at Georgia News Network and Georgia Public Broadcast, who also help promote what we do here. For those of you that do follow the Georgia Chamber, I'd encourage you to continue to do so over the next week and a half as we deal with recovery and resiliency during this, not a special session, but the rest of the Georgia General Assembly session, which we're working around the clock, particularly on liability protection for businesses as they come back and try to reopen after COVID-19, as well as a host of other bills. And you can just follow us on our website and on social media to learn more about those. And then lastly, we do have the latest updates from Governor Kemp's executive orders about reopening Georgia. You can find a breakdown of those at gachamber.com/COVID-19. So let's get into our discussion today. We have Will Bentley, who is the president of the Georgia Agribusiness Council. Before joining the Agribusiness Council, Will was with the Georgia Beef Board and Georgia Cattlemen's Association. We also have Mike Dowes, who's president of the Georgia Poultry Federation. Mike's been with them for a number of years, and before that, he was with University of Georgia and with Senator Sam Nunn. And lastly, rounding us out today, we have Jeffrey Harver, who's director of Georgia Farm Bureau Public Policy Department. He leads their lobbying efforts. Most importantly, though, he grew up one county above me in Wilcox County. I was down there in Ben Hill County. But even more important than that, he's a Georgia Southern Eagle, too. So that's why we have Jeffrey around. He clicks all of our South Georgia buttons and our Georgia Southern buttons, too. So, guys, thanks for being with us. We've heard and tracked a variety of stories and impact about agriculture during this. We heard about farmers, that had food that were left in the fields because they couldn't bring their workers over. We heard about disruptions of supply chains through the restaurant sector, just a number of stories. And what we've continued to tell people all over Georgia, that if farmers don't work, they don't eat at the end of the day, right? And so that it's so very important. While we were all on lockdown, farmers kept working, supply chain kept working, so we could go to the Publix and the Kroger's and get what we needed. And we are so blessed and thankful for what the farmers have done in Georgia, continue to feed us while facing the same problems that every other small business in the country have faced during this same time. And so today we really wanted to hear about what's going on with your members and our farmers and our poultry processors in Georgia, as well as lessons learned and what they need so that they can recover just like every small business and manufacturer and utility company in Georgia. So that's the discussion we want to have, and we're going to start off by letting each of these guys give us their own perspectives, and then we'll go through some questions here. So kicking us off, Will, tell us about what's happened in your sector, what you've seen, and what's happening with your members.
Yeah, well, thank you, Chris. We appreciate the opportunity to do this. And you mentioned, if farmers don't work, they don't eat. But if farmers don't work, none of us eat. And I think that's important to note. And, kind of what we all started doing from the very beginning. I know we worked directly with the Chamber, with Farm Bureau, Poultry Federation, right out of the gate to make sure that agriculture and agribusiness as a whole was deemed essential. And I think that was the most important thing that we all did as our groups. Right out of the gates was to get to work on that. I think we understood that things may slow down in other sectors, but you just can't stop what's happening on the farm. You can't stop what's happening to supply food to Americans, and I think that was vitally important that we did that right from the beginning. And we appreciate many of the folks on this call that were a part of that and helped do that. Some of the things that we've struggled with as an agribusiness council and for our members is a lot of these employees were seeing the news and hearing from folks, state leaders and national leaders about how bad the situation was, but they were still being asked to come to work. So that was a struggle that they were getting it from both ends, saying, okay, this is really, really bad, but I'm an essential worker, so I've got to leave my family, protect them, and go into a workplace. So I think the best thing that our small business owners and agribusinesses did out of the gate was make them feel comfortable when they came to work. I think you'll hear all of us talk about the safest place for workers in Georgia have been in these agribusinesses when they were going to work, when other people were staying home. And I think that was so important to do, because we didn't want there to be any type of fear of them coming in and taking something home with them to their families. I think from many of our food processors or manufacturers, they were talking about they were actually worried when their workers were going home, because they felt like they had the things in place at their workplace to keep it safe for everybody. They were able to sanitize workstations, and they were able to do all of that. So they were actually worried when those employees were actually back home. One of the other things that we did early on was kind of, as you saw these 6 feet requirements and other social distancing standards, we had to look and see how's that going to work for agribusiness, how's that going to work for farmers. You think a lot of people think of farm work as being out by yourself, but a lot of these crews and these workforces they're actually working in tight quarters, even in a field. You go to a blueberry farm, when they're picking, they're walking right there together in a row, and they're on different types of equipment. So really that 6-foot standard was hard to meet, even if you're on the farm. And it got even more so, and I know Mike will probably talk about that a little bit in the poultry processing, but even in our manufacturing facilities that are making fertilizer spreaders or tractors or whatever it is, we had to adapt quickly. And that was something that I think that agribusiness has led on, and those standards were put into place in all these essential industries that now we can see as other types of businesses open up, whether they're restaurants or whatever the case is, they're able to take those standards and implement them on something that's been proven to be safe. And I think that's what's been important is you've heard a lot of bad stuff from around the country, but in Georgia, I think we've actually been really, really great leaders in what that standard should be and what that safety for our workers should be. I wanted to point out too that, you mentioned some scary situations where people were panicking and doing a little panic buying early on. I know we were running low on toilet paper right there as things were breaking. So I on my way back from the Capitol after they shut it all down, I pulled into Publix, and I was shocked to see that I was too late. And I wasn't trying to panic buy. I was looking for a good 4-pack. But what's important is when you saw that, even on the meat shelves, there was not a shortage on the farm. Whether there was a shortage on the shelves, but our farms, our barns, our packing shed, our distributors, we had product. What we had to do is figure out how we got that product to where the consumers now were. I think some of the data that we learned quickly was that Georgians were getting 50 to 60% of their food and other items that they consume in a food service setting. So it wasn't that traditional home cooking that you think of, but we had to figure out, okay, well, they typically get half their food at a fast food restaurant or another restaurant or food service or at school or wherever they are. And now they're having to get it at the grocery store and take it home. So we have plenty of food. We just had to figure out how to get that to where consumers were purchasing it. And that's something that I think that we've been really proud of for agriculture of responding to. So I'll leave it there. I know we got a lot of the same issues across all three of us. So we'll kind of turn it back to you to let them answer more.
Absolutely. Thanks, Will. That's a great perspective. Mike, obviously agribusiness sector, but a little bit different, dealing with protein, and particularly with the poultry industry and some of the large houses and the processing as well as the farmers. So tell us what you've seen and what the experience has been like for your members.
Thank you, Chris. And first, I just want to thank the Georgia Chamber for your aggressive reaching out to your members. As a trade association ourselves, you set the example for how you serve your members. And I think for organizations like ours, our members hopefully have seen the worth of being engaged with chambers and trade associations and similar organizations. I'll talk about the impact of COVID on our industry, but first I want to give you an idea of the scale of the poultry industry and why it was important really to the nation as a critical infrastructure that we continue to operate. Georgia produces 15% of the nation's supply of poultry, and poultry is the most popular protein for Americans when they choose as consumers. So That translates to 30 million pounds of chicken produced every day and 7 million eggs, the eggs that we eat. So obviously in those early stages, it was critically important that we continue to produce food. But as Will said, our supply chains were severely disrupted. We're 100 days into the response to COVID. I count that from March 9th. It was 100 days yesterday. That to me was the week where we could really tell the pandemic was evolving and that things were going to be different and we'd have to respond. So very aggressively, our companies were already positioning themselves to respond to it. And I'm going to focus more on the processing side instead of the farm side, because that's where the large employment is. We started sharing best practices amongst ourselves, industry, through our trade association, through the federation, that week, mid-March. Some companies had already started implementing some best practices. But if you think back to that time, really the main recommendation from public health and CDC was wash your hands, don't touch your face. And employers were really in a position at that point to say, okay, what are we going to do in our workforce, in our workplace to make sure that our top priority is protecting our employees. So we started sharing ideas, screening employees for symptoms of COVID. That evolved into actually taking temperature checks of every single employee in Georgia before every shift. Enhanced cleaning of the plants. Naturally, in a food plant, you're cleaning. You already have that expertise, but enhancing that, taking it out into other parts of the facility. Will mentioned separation, the 6-foot standard. That is a challenge in a manufacturing or food processing setting. Our companies very innovatively, I think, created partitions between workers, actual physical barriers between workers, in addition to mandatory face coverings that became standard fairly early on. So within a matter of a week to 10 days, throughout Georgia and all the processing plants, we had literally physical barriers between employees built so that you could enhance that physical separation. So all of this happened in a matter of in March, early April. Very aggressive response to making sure that the workplace was as safe as possible. To give you a timeline, the CDC came out with the meat packing and poultry guidelines on April 26th, and we were well ahead. We were weeks and weeks ahead of that. So and so we'd already kind of met those standards. And then 2 days later, and this is why our industry is a little different than some others that in some cases had to close or chose to close operation. The president came out on April 28th and with an executive order and said, you have to stay open. You have to feed America. So we had, unique challenges there. So I won't go into the supply chain challenges, which Will covered very, very well. I just say that we kept operating, no layoffs. Every plant in Georgia is still hiring. We learned lessons. Many of these practices that we've implemented, I think, will continue because they'll help us in cold and flu seasons. And the other lessons is we learned that we have other partners in state government, and we've had some relationships there, but public health in our local hospitals, and especially in rural areas, are so critical to business continuity, especially in crisis like this. So I'm proud of our industry and how resilient it is. And I'm really proud of our employees who continue to show up and provide the services to put food on the table. So I'll close there and open to questions later on.
Thanks, Mike. And if my local Chick-fil-A is any indication of the popularity of chicken continues and skyrocket, I mean, it literally wrapped around double lines around the block. So we appreciate.
They figured it out. They figured out how to do it.
And we appreciate you guys continuing to supply. I need my chicken biscuit. Jeffrey, Farm Bureau has a rich history of supporting Georgia farmers and agribusiness across all sectors, but particularly those mom and pop, those small farmers. You're involved in the commodities as well. Tell us what you're hearing from your members and folks that you work with every day?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. First off, thank you to the Chamber for the partnership that we've shared with Farm Bureau and the Chamber over the years. And we'll say it's an honor to be on the panel with guests like Will and Mike. They're two of the largest, best advocates for agriculture in the state, and I will defer any tough questions to them going forward. But yeah, this is first. Let me tell you a little bit about. You mentioned Farm Bureau and our history and the type of people that we represent. We were founded in the 30s, basically to be a voice for farmers. A lot of people know us as an insurance company, and that is a service that we provide to the general public. But our goal and my team's goal here every day is to understand the problems that are impacting farmers and try our best to develop solutions to those problems. And that sounds simple, but it's far more difficult than it sounds. Will and Mike both restated it probably better than I can. This has been unprecedented times. I mean, it is something that we don't have a playbook for what we just went through the last 2.5, 3 months. And you know, when you find yourself in this situation, you don't know how long this is going to last, or is this going to be 2 weeks? Is this going to be the new normal going forward? So producers had a lot of questions, and they looked to us to try to help them. And one of the challenging things we have at Farm Bureau is that, you know, we represent all commodities from apples to zucchini, so to speak, and then being able to work with each one of those producers to help them with what they need is difficult at times. Early on, we recognized there were issues in access to capital. We knew that there were going to be problems with labor. Initially through the H-2A program, we worked with USDA and DOL to make sure that some of our H-2A workers that were here could transition over to other farms to make sure we could get the crops out that we needed. Our goal through this process, and whether it was working on the PPP program or EIDL, just to try to make sure farmers were educated, was to dig into the policy side, understand what those issues were, and then try to keep the farmers educated on what's available to them. And, you know, during CFAP, there's some commodities, the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program that's being run through USDA, trying to make sure that every producer of a commodity would be covered in that, and what type of losses were impacted. When this hit, and Mike mentioned March 9th, I mean, put yourself into the place of a farmer. That time of year, they're trying to determine what crops they're going to plant. At that time, corn was down 18% on the year. Cotton was down 21%, and soybeans were down 14%. If you're renting farmland, if you're farming dry land, those type of dips in commodity prices, almost you can't make that make sense on paper when you're trying to put a plan together to present to your banker. So there's real challenges out there. Like Mike said, I am proud of the industry. I think we've done a great job trying our best to get through this. And you know, at the end of the day, it's been tough, but I do think that the consumer will understand and appreciate the farmer more, and the processing facility more, and the grocery store more, because that shift of food demand, we were all at the grocery store. And I think the general public got a better understanding of the production practice and the process to take food and put it on the table. So with that, I'll stop right there and yield for questions.
Thanks, Jeffrey. I appreciate that. And you brought up something I want to go to Will and let him expound on it some if we can. And that's the issue about H-2A visa programs and the importance of those farm workers in the agribusiness sector out there. You know, Jeffrey talked about helping get some visas to move people around, but this has been a debate that's been ongoing in Congress now for several years. You know, we've heard from farmers, we've heard from you guys on these issues. We're obviously wanting to work with you. Will, what is this? what changes do we need in H2A? What are we seeing in H2A that's going to help farmers in the long run? And have we learned any lessons from this virus going to help us with Congress?
I think the importance may. I think that's just a political hot potato that gets thrown around, and that's what's disappointing to all of us. I know Jeffrey has worked on H2A for years, and Farm Bureau is usually leading that charge, and we're working right there with them to try to figure that out. But for any of our agribusiness, especially any of those that are on the farm level, they can't do what they do without H2A labor. Unfortunately, we're just at a point in time where Americans just aren't able to do the job as quickly. And I don't mean that they're not able to do the job. It's just these folks that come in, they're actually skilled labor that are crews that come in, and a lot of times they do the same type crop year after year, and they're highly specialized, and they're essential to us across the board. Some of the things that we need to do is expand that program, in my opinion, so that we can have those type of labor workforce in other sectors of agriculture that are more year-round, dairy, for instance, or some of the other places, and urban agriculture and landscaping where we could use a skilled labor force for a longer period of time. The program works for the farmers that are able to utilize that, and Georgia being one of the leading states for using that labor force. But we just simply couldn't we couldn't produce the food we do here in this country without them. As far as any types of things moving forward, I think that coronavirus highlighted the need for them. So maybe that'll change the conversation there to show that, hey, look, when we needed these folks, they were here for us. So let's figure out a program that works for them so that they can come in, do a job, get paid a very fair wage, and then be able to go home to their families and live lives that they want to live. And our farmers are able to produce the food that we have to produce to keep Georgians and Americans and even the world fed, because that's our role in this country. And labor is a part of the big picture for agriculture, and agriculture is a part of the big picture for national security. So I think that may be oversimplifying things, but really that kind of breaks it down to the bare bones of how important that is to us. But I could turn it to Jeffrey, who's probably spent a lot more time working with Washington and other leaders around the country on it.
Jeffrey, you wanna add on to this?
Yeah, Will summarized it very accurately. I mean, our industry it demands access to labor, and these jobs are skilled labor. They're very difficult. Chris, you referenced my hometown in Abbeville, where I grew up cropping tobacco, and that was my incentive to study hard when I went to Georgia Southern, so I didn't have to do that. And that's another example of why these programs are important. These jobs, they only last 6-8 weeks out of the year, and then as the crops ripen south, moving north, that's where that workforce migrates throughout that growing season. For people that live here full time, they want full time work. They want full time employment, and they don't want to travel the East Coast cropping tobacco or picking blueberries. So access to a program that's workable is something we've worked on for 20 years that I've been here at Farm Bureau. And there's currently just a lot of red tape involved. There's a lot of industries, like Will mentioned, dairy and nursery, that are left out that need access to that labor as well. We will continue, and I know we've been partners with the Chamber on working to try to find some reform that would be beneficial to the agriculture.
Right. And that effort here at the Chamber with the Georgia Hispanic Chamber is extremely important, and we continue that work and appreciate partnering with you guys on it. And Mike, I think that's a good lead-in to talk a little bit. I'd love to get your perspective on, what happened in Gainesville there. We heard the governor kind of, as the Albany hotspot died down, we saw Gainesville with a hotspot take off. Some of that was based around our Latino population there that worked in the in the poultry facilities there. Tell us a little bit about the response and where we are today and how that community worked with Governor Kemp, worked with different partners and came in and solved the issue.
Chris, you highlighted the most important thing, the community's response to COVID-19, and I'm not sure how we define a hotspot, but we had a period in April where the new case numbers were high, and we were challenged, and really it was a very community-oriented response. We had our local healthcare providers, Northeast Georgia Health System, Longstreet Clinic, our other nonprofits, and also just community leaders in the Hispanic Latino community who formed a formal task force that was whose goal was to communicate. And I think that was our biggest challenge. As employers, we had done everything that we knew to do, and we're continually trying to improve the safety in the workplace. But the communication to citizens and Latino Hispanic community especially about things that you can do now that we've done taking these steps in the workplace. What can you do at home to protect yourself and your family? And that has been really the focus of this community effort across all sectors and I'm really proud of Hall County. We worked with this group and also with GEMA, State of Georgia Department of Ag, to deliver in Gainesville area alone over 100,000 face coverings, not to our employees because we're already providing them in the workplace, but to give to an employee to take home to share with their family and friends. And so in a community our size, it had quite an impact, I think. But it was driven from the bottom up, community up, with leadership from our chamber, local chamber and hospital, and non-NGOs. So I think it was very successful, and we're staying vigilant. We're alert to any kind of resurgence, and we're not letting our guard down because the job's not finished yet.
And I know too, General King was up there as well and engaged. I mean, it really was all hands on deck effort out there. So
yeah, we appreciate the general because he came in and toured a plant, but then was able to go out and communicate directly to Latino community in his own language, and that was very powerful for us.
Right. So, guys, kind of last question. I'll let each of you comment on it. As we look at long-term recovery, both at the federal level, which we're just now starting to see phase 4 bills start coming together, as the General Assembly looks at issues this week and next week in Georgia, and then obviously this recession is not going to go away. It's going to continue to impact, particularly, it will impact farmers, but it's really going to have a bigger impact on rural communities. Our rural communities were just recovering after the last recession. It took us 8 years. We were starting to see the rebound. And I know all 4 of us are all from rural Georgia. We care about it. Now we're seeing the potential to slide back into it. So I'm curious, either from a rural standpoint or from a farm standpoint, what are policies or strategies or recommendations that you think are most important at the federal or at the state level? And I'll tell you what, Jeffrey, we'll start with you.
I think living through the last 3 months of Zoom meetings, and for one, we've learned that we can do things remotely, and we don't always have to gather together, even though meeting together has its benefits too. But some of the rural areas in the state having access to broadband and being able to conduct meetings like we're having right now, that is very important. To me, I think what we've understood throughout this process, we've learned how important producing and securing our own food and fiber is, in not only in this country but in our state. I think we've got to continue to be able to do that in the future, not only as a national security issue, but protect us when these unforeseen events like what we just through the last 3 months. In order to do that, I think we need to take care of the people that are taking care of us and provide those things. And one way that we can do that is to support local and utilize our local farmers. Our Commissioner Black, probably the best in the country at what he does, has led the Georgia Grown program and built it to what it is. There's far more visibility than we've ever had for our Georgia produced products. We've got to continue upon that and encourage people to demand local production. I believe Alma, Georgia refers to itself as the blueberry capital of the world, but during harvest season, we will see Mexican blueberries on the shelves in their stores. And we've got to demand better, and we've got to support our people and support our producers. And that's one way to do it with your checkbook. So that's just one thing that I see.
Hey, Jeffrey, listen, it starts at home, right? We can't expect the elected leaders to do stuff for us if we're not willing to do it ourselves. So that's a great point. Will, what about from your perspective?
I agree wholeheartedly there. I mean, I think the Georgia Grown to go hit a nerve with Georgians. I think that you've seen it all over the state, from Representative Casey Carpenter and Dalton to what's going on in Decatur and Gwinnett and Cobb and now out in Augusta and all over the state, but also even in our local communities in South Georgia, which you would think if you were in South Georgia, you would have access to fresh fruits and vegetables and meats all the time. It's just simply not true. I mean, people that are closest to the food production a lot of times struggle to get the freshest food in their stores. I think we've seen communities band together and try to fix that through all of this. I think you've seen several farmers start offering these boxes that can come and be picked up on their farm locations or in their packing shed. And that's been a huge deal. And I hope that's something that continues on in the future, because I think it's just allowed not only for these farmers to survive, which I think is actually a bright spot in all of this. I think some of our fruit and vegetable growers have actually seen some decent prices, and a lot of that has to do from a demand for local product. So I hope that continues. I hope that we continue to see, if not Georgia grown products on the store shelves, but at least American grown, like Jeffrey was mentioning, especially in the middle of our growing season. We understand it when you want an avocado in an off season, or a pineapple or some other things, but when we're growing the best and the safest here in the state, it doesn't make sense for our stores to be stocking their shelves with other things. So I think that's one. I think, again, all the Zoom meetings, I know I've been on several that have gained laughs from the fact that I was either on a tractor or you couldn't understand me. I think rural broadband is going to be the key to allowing rural Georgia to keep up. I think we've shown that we're capable of doing the work from wherever we are. But you have to have access to high-speed internet to be able to do it. That's one. I think, rural healthcare is going to be a big deal for our agribusinesses to invest the money that they're going to do in a community. If they want to expand their business, they're going to want their workers to have access to healthcare. They want to have access to good schools. And I think those are two keys that, a lot of folks, when they're looking for a place to live, man, it would be nice to live on 10, 15 acres out in the country, but I want to make sure my family's taken care of, and we want to make sure those services are provided, and figuring out how do we do that in a public-private partnership or whatever that is. And I think that's going to be something we've all worked on for years, but that's going to be the biggest thing we need to fix in the future, in my opinion. And with that also is logistics and infrastructure. We can't grow our products like we do in rural parts of the country if we can't put them on a truck, put them on a train, and get them to the consumer. So we have to make sure that we're continuously investing in that sector and infrastructure to make sure that our bridges can handle the truck sizes, that our roads can handle the truck weights that are there, that we can move products. And I think those are just some of they're not small issues. They're some of the big issues that we can tackle. But I think we've seen the ability to be resilient. I think Jeffrey used that word earlier. And I think rural communities can do that and provide a quality of life that, being a rural Georgia guy myself, I think the quality of life is just so much greater if you have access to all those things I just mentioned. I think a lot of people would like to be able to move out of the city centers if they could, but they do it just out of a necessity to have access to healthcare and entertainment and food and all the other things that we talked about.
Yeah, those are all great points. And a lot of, Will, what you've talked about, those are systemic issues that we've been facing. And I think COVID's made them more prevalent and hopefully will help us spur more action. Mike, what about from your perspective?
Well, I agree with what Will and Jeffrey said, so I won't recover those. But in communities throughout the state, the local economy depends on poultry facilities, poultry farming operations. And so as our industry recovers, we're really dependent on the overall economic recovery, and opening of our institutions and people getting back into a normal pace of life. And so policies that promote doing that safely is critically important to us. We'll recover when people start eating in the patterns that they did before COVID-19. In other words, as Will mentioned earlier, about 50% of food consumed outside the home and 50% at home. And that's when we'll see kind of normalized financial patterns in our industry. The one thing that's very important to us is trade. And so on a national level, trade policies that encourage free and fair trade, free trade agreements. And just to give you one example of how that has kind of helped us through this period of disruption in demand is China. We were allowed back into the China market in January after being banned for about since 2015. China, since going from 0 in January to April, now China is our #1 market again. And so representing about 20% of all of our exports. And so it just goes to show how dependent we are and what kind of opportunities there are in the international marketplace. Lastly, it's a reminder for us that we need to do everything we can to support our healthcare systems, especially in rural areas, and we know that's been a signature priority of the chamber and many other organizations. But our healthcare partners are critically important to us, not only in a crisis like this, but always. So I'll just close with that, and thank you again, Chris, and everyone at the chamber for all that you've done to help us through this pandemic period too.
Well, thanks, Mike, and we appreciate you and Will and Jeffrey and the partnership that we have with all you guys, and you'll all know that we're here to support you and the farm industry in Georgia 24/7. I would be remiss if I didn't also give a plug today. We started our smart healthcare plan, gosh, 1.5 years ago now. Jeffrey and our friends at Farm Bureau started a similar program. I know it's been very successful. It's a great asset to small businesses, just like our program is as well. So Jeffrey, I know you'd want me to say that if you want to learn more about that health program or the smart plan at the chamber, just go to our website or the Farm Bureau website to learn more there. We're going to continue our roundtable discussions next week on Tuesday, the 23rd from 11 to 12. We'll have the future of manufacturing with Textron, Deloitte, and with Kia. So you'll learn more about what's happening with them through COVID-19. On Wednesday, the 24th from 11 to 12, we'll have day 2 of the future of manufacturing, where we'll be talking to minority manufacturers in Georgia and how they've survived. And then on Thursday, the 25th at 2 o'clock, we'll be leading as part of a national effort, a day of dialogue to discuss systemic racism and opportunity equality in the state. And I know all of our businesses care about that issue. You can go to gachamber.com/events to register for all of those. And I'd also encourage you, if you are interested in Georgia's hate crime legislation and seeing that pass this year, that you can go to our website and put your company's name on a growing list of over almost 500 Georgia businesses that have said it's time for the General Assembly to act on that issue now. And of course, continue to follow us so you know exactly what's happening over the next week and a half at the Georgia General Assembly session. So, guys, thank you for what you do. Thanks for being with us. And for all of those that are on our call, God bless you, and may God continue to bless our state. Thanks so much.